Welcome in lacrosse fans to the Utah Lacrosse Report podcast. I'm your host, Tim Haslam. My guest today is University of Utah head coach Drew McMinn. In this episode, we talk about him growing up in Pittsburgh and playing lacrosse at a young age. We also talk about the 2026 Utah schedule, the 2 games that have been played so far, and also preview the upcoming game against Denver, which is this Saturday. This game will be at noon at Rice-Eccles Stadium, and admission is free. Should be good weather too, so see you there. Hope you enjoy the show. Welcome to the show, Coach. How are you?
Good, Tim. I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining me. A big opportunity for Utah this weekend when Denver comes to town. Home opener, always fun to get to see this new version of the Utes. And then, of course, at Rice-Eccles Stadium, which is a fun venue to play at. But first question I ask every guest: when did you start playing lacrosse?
Yeah, so I started playing, I want to say it was 5th grade. Both my older brothers had played, and, growing up in Pittsburgh, it wasn't a hotbed by any means, but had some neighbors that had a background with the sport that introduced my older brothers originally. So by the time I got into 5th grade, they were already in high school and playing for a couple years at that point. So picked up a goalie stick because that's what both of them were, and didn't really have a choice because I had the same youth coach, and kind of never looked back from there from 5th grade on. So.
Yeah, you played in high school, then ended up at Providence where you played lacrosse, and then it started coaching pretty much right after that. Talk us through just your coaching journey so far.
Yeah, so right away out of college, I had actually not initially planned on getting into coaching. And Robert Morris University had just started their program when I was a senior at Providence, and they were located just about 25 minutes from where I grew up in Pittsburgh, and had a call from the head coach that was kind of looking to assemble a staff at the time, because in year 1 he was a little bit on an island on his own there with no staff in place, because just when the program started, they didn't have the resources originally to put full-time assistant positions in place. And coming back and them going into their 2nd year, he reached out and found out I was back in the area, and felt like a pretty cool opportunity to get into. I always knew I wanted to potentially go towards athletics and coming out of college, but wasn't exactly sure what path that was going to be. And then when the coaching opportunity presented itself, just started there, and was an assistant for 6 years, and started out volunteering for a couple of years, then eventually a graduate assistant to get my master's. And by that point, I knew it was what I wanted to do for a living. So I think my last year as an assistant, year 6, I became full-time. And then my 7th year there was when Bear Davis had left, and I was able to take over the program in 2011. And then was there until taking the job here at Utah in the fall of 21. So.
Yeah, and it's been a successful tenure at Utah. Obviously, a couple ASUN championships. Looking to get another one this year. Talk about the team this year, just overall in general, and what fans can expect.
Yeah, I mean, we're excited about the group we have, and again, coming into the year, I mean, certainly just as always, trying to stay focused on just being the best version that we can be of ourselves. And last year felt just with a lot of really tight losses and a younger group with a lot of returners, just really focusing on just the small differences that that make up the difference on the scoreboard week in and week out. And again, as with our program, we dive into just really being focused on the process and finding ways to just get ourselves a little bit better each day. And you always go into the season a little bit blind outside of scrimmages, and certainly felt like we opened up on a strong note, with playing Delaware, and another scenario that, go figure, we had some travel complications with. But, certainly felt like the guys just responded. It's a hungry group right now. And, again, turning around and playing Duke this past week, we felt like it was just obviously not our best game, but, really from a mindset standpoint and what we challenged the guys to think, regardless of opponent and situation, we really felt like we had a great response from them. So, and a lot of our review was just how it wasn't about who we were up against. We just had too many self-inflicted errors, and some stick work errors that we felt like were a little bit out of character there that can show up at the beginning of the year. But I think our group believes that when we put everything together and we're focused on just being the best we can be, that we can compete with anyone in the country this season.
Yeah, and a couple different things happened so far. Obviously, a scrimmage against Notre Dame on a Friday afternoon. Then you had the Delaware. I wouldn't call it a fiasco, but the situation where games were being changed. One of the few games that actually took place that week, which was impressive. There was a great article on Inside Lacrosse about how you needed a waiver to get the game
Yeah.
going and all that. And so the team, I feel, has been through quite a bit already. But to your credit and the staff's credit, it doesn't look that way from the outside. So it's very cool. Talk about a couple of things. How does a college schedule come together? What are the steps taken? Most fans probably know in like football, those are multi-year agreements that are done years in advance. Definitely not the same way with lacrosse. But how does a schedule kind of come together?
No, a much less organized and less attractive system that we deal with on our end. But I believe football is still the only sport that the athletic directors do all of the scheduling. Within every other sport, I want to say it's even still within men's and women's basketball that the
Yeah.
scheduling is all still done directly. And we have a system where you can go in and basically log that you have an open date. That's not a system that everybody uses as often as they could. But you are able to go in and just check respective weekends and look and see who might have put that they have an open date there. And, then beyond that, it's really just the relationships. It's a lot of direct contacts and, just reaching out to coaches and, and seeing what they have available year to year. And, it's, tricky, obviously, where you're trying to put together the most competitive schedule that you can, but you're also trying to put together, a travel friendly schedule and have as many home games as you possibly are able to. And, make all those puzzle pieces kind of fit together. But, it starts with literally just reaching out to coaches. I mean, at this point, Denver is going to be a team that we play every single year. We have that relationship established and, have agreed to just keep going back and forth to one another, fall and spring, actually. And then Marquette's been a school that, again, not your East Coast, hotbed areas that we typically have to travel to, but a little bit of a shorter trip for us and for them when they're coming out west to us. So that's another one that's been a mainstay on the schedule here. Notre Dame, we've had pretty consistent with those scrimmages, minus 2 years ago. But there's the ones that we'll just lock in place and set up the home and homes with to go back and forth. And then you're normally working with about 4 open dates a year that go beyond the conference play and the games that you have kind of stamped on the schedule each year. And again, that's just direct contacts, reaching out to coaches we have relationships with, and teams that we feel like are going to be best to put us in position to be successful to schedule there.
Yeah, and the hot topic this year, does Division I lacrosse start too soon? And there's a variety of ideas on if that is the case, if it should go longer, if more midweek games should be played. Talk about some of the challenges to all of those solutions.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if there is a great solution. If there was, we probably would have all figured it out by now. But with starting early, I mean, the obvious con is that you're dealing with all the weather. The pro is that, again, your guys can play sooner. I know when I was in college and we didn't open up until the second year of March typically. I mean, going through a preseason of all of January, all of February, and 2 weeks of March. I mean, I don't think players would choose that path. Because I know we certainly didn't enjoy it that way back then. We wanted to kill each other by the time we actually got to outside competition. So, but that was pretty extreme with how late we used to start. And then we used to play, midweek games almost every week. So it was, Wednesday, Saturday for almost the entire season there. But, for us specifically in respective to our situation, I mean, traveling midweek can be pretty difficult. And I've heard coaches talk about how people don't want to do it because of game planning. I mean, that's the last of our concerns. We're fine with, having a shorter turnaround with game planning. But, again, when we're having guys miss class and, travel twice in a week, if we're going to play away on a Wednesday, then we're traveling on Tuesday morning, as potentially getting back Wednesday night, maybe Thursday morning. And then, if we're away on that Saturday, we turn around and leave 24 hours later on a Friday morning. So there is an academic component to being a student athlete as well, which I think a lot of times is overlooked. But again, we feel like when we play on Saturdays, it's minimal class time missed, and we're not compromising them more than we need to academically. And again, if we can make the weather work and have indoor facilities to start the season a little earlier, I don't see any issue with it. I know it's not ideal for fans, and we have games where fans can't be present. That's obviously not great for the sport, but if we can work around those things and have legitimate indoor facilities to play in, or, to me also, fight the cold and deal with it. I know it's, tough if there's injury risk to the facility or things along those lines with inclement weather. But, was joking with the Delaware coach, with Coach DeLuca, about the fact that, in the NFL, guys are out with their shirts off for an hour before the pregame of, the playoff games when it's negative 15 degrees outside. So,
Yeah.
they don't talk about indoor facilities for NFL playoffs ever when they're going to Lambeau Field. So, I don't know. Part of me, I just think we got to brave it. But if it does affect the fans and it affects the playing surface, and all of a sudden it's compromising the athlete on the field, then I think there's things that need to be changed.
Yeah, definitely. And you did look. I watched the Duke game. Your cheeks were probably the rosiest I've ever seen them, because you did look pretty chilly. But to your point, it does make sense to brave the weather sometimes, and we can call ourselves a spring sport all you want, but even in the spring it can get pretty chilly. So it's
Yeah.
definitely something to consider. I guess the other big topic of talk is, do we move away from Memorial Day? Are you a Memorial Day proponent, or would going into June make sense?
I'm always on the fence with one. I mean, I get it that there's just, kind of our allegiance to that weekend, and, and honoring Memorial Day, I think, is a pretty cool part of what takes place there. So, I think it's a little bittersweet if we were to move it off of that, because there are just the, kind of the nostalgia and the things that have come along with playing on that weekend. But, I think there's certainly better setups that we could have if we were to move past Memorial Day. I've always felt like Navy Memorial Stadium is the absolute perfect venue for the Final Four, as far as just capacity and being a little bit smaller than the NFL stadiums, and located in Annapolis, and obviously they get great draws when they host for the quarterfinal games, and Memorial Day weekend's never an option there because they do their graduation, and I think moving back a week or two could alleviate things, where we could, one, start the season at least 1 or 2 weeks later in theory, and also be able to just really, really focus on what we turn that Final Four weekend into, versus having to kind of, be a little bit handcuffed, just only always working with that Memorial Day weekend.
Yeah, and if you moved it off of that weekend, you could potentially do a Friday, Sunday, something along those lines. Not just stick to the Saturday, Monday type stuff. But definitely fun to talk about. It's lit in the lacrosse world on fire. Trying to, everyone's giving their opinion. So thanks for sharing yours. I appreciate it. Talk about when I was at the U, working with you, and even now, a lot of people ask, what is the U looking for in a recruit? When you're out on the recruiting trail in the summer, what is something that you're looking for in a kid?
Yeah, I mean, there's the, two components, as far, well, three when you throw in the academic piece, but, we're evaluating you as an athlete and as a lacrosse player. Then we're evaluating your character, beyond that. And that's what we really try to dive into in every way that we can, whether it's, what we're seeing when you're on the field competing, or of course, once we bring you to campus and go through the visit process and get to know you a little bit more. But the academic piece is always pretty straightforward, because we're dealing with transcripts and test scores, and things that are pretty black and white in regards to the academic piece. But the lacrosse side of things specifically, I mean, we have such a strong identity here, being a transition oriented team, and trying to play as one of the fastest teams in the country year in and year out, where midfielders, we're looking for a blueprint of guys that can play at both ends of the field, that have the athletic ability to to play in between the lines and create transition. And for attackmen, it's very important for us to get strongly skilled players, because the stick work with our ball movement is crucial. And we want guys that can fit. If they're going to get a lot of their opportunities in transition, we want them to be able to finish and shoot at a high level. So sometimes we've traditionally had some guys in our systems that might not be as two-handed, or might not be as much of a dodging threat, but 80% of their shots come with their hands free in transition. So I've always said I'd rather have a guy that shoots at 40% that might not be quite as dynamic, than a guy that's more dynamic that shoots at 20 to 25%. And again, that's just very specific to our style of play. And with poles, we want guys that, of course, can not only play and defend well on that end of the field, but can net the ball up and off the ground, and push the transition game, and have the stick work to do so. So there's definitely specific traits we look for on the field that are just to suit our system, and what each position really encompasses within our style of play. And then the character wise, it's finding guys that love to play the game first and foremost. I've always hated the specializing philosophy or term, because I've said one of the biggest battles as a college coach is getting guys to just keep their passion for all 4 years. because it's tough. I don't think any player of any sport can tell you they went through an athletic career in college and that they loved every day of it. So for us, it starts with that passion. And, we feel like if you just absolutely love the game and love to play it, then when things are hard and when you deal with adversity and, you're maybe having some failures throughout your career, that passion is going to push you through those things. So, and then beyond that, again, when we talk about character, we want guys that are obviously very respectful and, show that they're somebody that cares about their teammates. And, we're big on just, again, approaching everything on the field as a lesson in life. And we want guys that understand that when things don't go your way, there's, a way to respond and a way not to respond. And, when we see guys on the field that are putting their hands up or blaming an official or, blaming a teammate or yelling at their coaches, then for us, I'd say that's just, there's too much talent out there to even try to fit a square peg into a round hole if we feel like there's hesitation on that end of things. So those little intangibles that we can see within your play are certainly a big part of our evaluation. And then when you come to campus, we want guys that really show ownership. We understand their parents are going to be a big part of their experience, and they've done a lot of work to put them in that position. But we also want to make sure that we're bringing in people that value what we value, and a lot of that's teaching our young men how to be prepared when they finish here, and when they show that they're able to take ownership and handle the conversations when they come on recruiting visits, and that the passion is showing that it's coming from them and not just the parents. That's one of the big ones we really look at of just checking off the box of what type of person we're getting. So but that character piece, I think everybody preaches it, that it goes into their decision. I think we certainly, are pretty diligent in making sure that does weigh into every single decision we make as far as who we're getting as a person and not just a lacrosse player.
Yeah, and right now on the team, you've got a bunch of different studs in that category. You also mentioned when you're looking at a defender, you want him to be able to get the ball off the ground and push transition, and I think there's no better person than Nico Deponia at doing that. And if you watched any of the games so far this year, it's clear. And they mentioned something on the Duke broadcast. I don't know, you probably haven't listened to it, but Anish and Kark were saying that Nico spends 45 minutes after practice each day practicing his ground ball skills. And I've personally seen it, because when I would walk home, or I would walk to the parking lot from my office, I would walk past the practice field, and he was always out there every day practicing the ground ball. So for the kids listening out there, that's the kind of effort and kind of commitment it takes to play Division I lacrosse. The other question I had for you is, for coaches that are listening, you go to Delaware, face tricky situation, but then, all intents and purposes played a really great game. Then you go to Duke the next week, maybe not so great. What are you telling the team? What can a coach that's coaching high school who goes through the same things, what can they express to the team to keep the path going up, to keep the momentum moving forward?
Yeah, it's a great question. And for us, we really harp on just trying to have the same response no matter what the result is. And, I've always, tried to preach that to our staff, that we have to try to evaluate our performance based upon, our performance and not what the result of that game was. And I still to this day always keep myself in check of just asking myself, hey, what's my response after the game? And what's my response when we go into our Monday, review meeting if we did the exact same things, but the result worked out in the opposite direction? Because it's the natural response. I tell our guys, I'm like, it doesn't take, talent as a coach or as a player to react to the result of a game. You do all the proof you need is going to a 5-year-old soccer game, and when they find out they win after, even though they didn't know, they all jump up and cheer. And when they find out they lose, they all get frowny faces. So, it doesn't take a lot of talent to evaluate that. And, I think it's pretty difficult at times to remove your emotion from the response of what your results are. And, Saban's a big one of always saying results are the biggest distractions that you're ever going to deal with, because, they make you want to change. When you do well, you want to get complacent at times. And when you're not doing so well, you want to finger point, you want to blame, you want to start making excuses. And, for us, we just always tell the guys, hey, we're not looking at that result. It's about what did we do well and what did we need to build upon, and what are the things that we clearly need to address to improve upon. And, the emotion that we show them after a game, and, the emotion that we show them in, a Monday review session, we want them to feel like is the exact same, whether it's a result that worked against us or a result that worked in our favor. So, with Duke, there was very specific things that we felt like we, kind of shot ourselves in the foot with some turnovers and, stick work errors that were just in no way whatsoever, reflective of who we were playing. It was just our own level of play. And I think the guys realize there's some pretty small differences that if you clean up, then, things work out in a much different way. And, we harped on just, again, when things don't go your way, I think you got to look at the positives and make sure you're uplifting guys. When things, do go your way, you're still keeping them in check to realize that they got to be held accountable to keep raising the bar. And with Duke not going our way, I mean, a big thing we pointed out, I mean, the stat difference and the score difference pretty much all took place in the first 6 minutes of the second quarter, where it was 2-1 at the end of the first. They outshot us by 15 and they face off. They had 5 more face off wins than us, and they beat us by 7 on the scoreboard. Well, the first 6 minutes of the second quarter, they outshot us 12-0. They possessed the ball the entire 6 minutes. They won 4 or 5 faceoffs. The one we won, we turned the ball over, and they went on a 5-0 run. So when you take out that 6 minutes, it was a 1-goal game the rest of the game, and shots are pretty even, ground balls are even, faceoffs are even. So we really talked about in a situation where things worked against us of again making sure we're uplifting them in ways and realizing that there is plenty of positives that we still need to build off of.
Yeah, definitely. And you look ahead to this weekend with Denver coming to town. What are on paper or in the film have you seen from Denver? What can fans expect this weekend?
Yeah, I mean they've had 2 games where they weren't very battle tested. They opened up and won 20-1 against Cleveland State, and turned around last week and beat Air Force 10-2. So they've had 2 games where they've obviously had the security of knowing that they were ahead from pretty early on, throughout the 60 minutes there, and continuing to keep that advantage. So, for us, we have so much familiarity with them. We played them in the fall again with scrimmaging them, and, we're close with their staff. And, I think it's one of those, type of like NFL matchups when, you're in the same division at this point where you just, what you're going to get from each team. And they have some changes. There's some different things showing up on film for them this year, and some, some new personnel. But, I think we certainly both have pretty high level understanding of each other right now, just playing every fall and spring over the last handful of years. And, they're playing a little bit faster. I think it's going to be a very up tempo game. We certainly want to do what we do week in and week out and put our foot on the gas. So, I would expect a pretty high pace game, maybe even more so than what we've seen out of playing against them in the past. And they have strong goalie play. He's been obviously holding, one team to no goals because he actually didn't let up the 1 goal in the Cleveland State game, and then, holding Air Force to 2 goals. I mean, he's been the strength of that end of the field. So certainly got to make sure we're having a strong shooting day. And again, those transition opportunities are always going to typically turn into higher percentage shots in theory, and making sure we get those ones as we can. And when we get our opportunities in settled situations, that we're just shooting the ball at a high level to make sure that we're not letting him take over the game as he has the first couple weeks.
Yeah, definitely. And for fans out there, there's no excuses not to be to this one. It's free admission. The skiing's been terrible this year, and it looks to be like it'll be sunny. So no excuses for fans not to be there. That game's at noon at Rice-Eccles. Coach, I want to thank you for coming on the show today. I have one last question for you. Have you been to In-N-Out yet?
I still have not. Still haven't
Okay.
done it. I don't
All
know.
right.
The line at In-N-Out just blows my mind every day. I don't know what type of time I'd need to actually commit to sit in that drive-through line.
But it's in the name, Coach. You're in and out, right? You're
that's
and then
true.
you're out.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of a misnomer there based on the way that drive-through line looks.
It's always busy, that's for sure. But that speaks to its quality and freshness. And they are not a sponsor, although I would welcome it if they wanted to be.
I'll shout out Crown Burger. We're a Crown Burger family at this point.
Hey man, that Highland Drive Crown Burger saw many post-game meals from when I was playing at Highland. So not opposed to the Crown Burger, definitely. Thanks again, Coach. I appreciate it, and we'll see you Saturday.
Cool. Thanks for having me, Tim. Have a good one.